Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's topic, steering rack repair. As you can see from that video clip, I've had to do a steering rack rebushing on this car here. Now, I just finished rebuilding the suspension in the previous episode, link up here. And out on the test drive I noticed there was still a clunking sound, so that made me decide to investigate further suspension components. Particularly subframe mounts, and then obviously I found the steering rack problem. Now, the problem with the rack itself is that there's a nylon bush that lives inside here. This is an older model of the rack with the small screw on the end. The rack in these injection cars do not have the small screw. They just have a circlip retainer holding the bush in place, which I will show you later. But the racks in these cars are a lot easier to fix than they are in these units. Now, I will be doing a small bench teardown, show you guys how it works on these older racks. But on the newer one, the bushing can simply be pulled out, press in a new one, and you're done. So if you've got an injection car with that style of rack, I recommend just doing an in-place repair. Otherwise, you can buy new racks. They're inexpensive. It's just time and effort to change one. You've got to drop the front subframe down, and then obviously work the rack out of the car, fit a new one, reset your toe. Whereas if you've got a decent condition rack, you can just replace the bush. Now, this rack is okay. If I hold it up here, you'll notice that you can set the steering arm to pretty much whatever angle you want, and it pretty much holds its position. That means that the swivel joint here is in good shape. If we check this other end here, we can see that it's basically the same condition. It's a fairly stiff swivel joint. So this rack is still in good shape, which is why I'm going to go through the trouble of replacing the bush on this end. Otherwise, I would just replace it. Also, if there is any wear and tear up here with the worm drive, just get a new rack. There's no point in trying to fix one of these if this is worn out. Pretty much the only reason why I repair them is for the bush on this end. So here we are with the wheel removed. Now, you need to take off the tie rod end. And you notice I've written in the number 14. That's from doing all the alignment work earlier on this car. This end was 14 turns to set my toe. But you need to prepare to remove the tie rod end from the steering arm. And then you need to cut the clips, either plastic clips or the metal screw clamps. You need to get the clips off of the boot because you need to get the boot to fully withdraw from the rack in order to get access to the bushing itself. So I've withdrawn the boot, as you can see here, and that's the little knuckle end of the rack, the swivel joint end. It's basically just a ball joint. It's not serviceable. Now, you need to get this end off of the steering rack itself, and typically it's attached to the rack with a small punched mark. So the rack has a keyway, and this is just punched locked in place once it's been torqued down. And the way you get these off is using a pair of like vice grips or mole grips, pretty much anything with expandable jaws, and I'll show you that in a second. So this is what I'm talking about, one of these pipe wrenches. It's great for doing this job because the jaws actually clamp down as you start turning. And what you need to do is you need to get into here and then loosen the joint itself. So as you can see, I've got the wrench fitted, and now it's just a matter of loosening it off. So you can see I've got the pipe wrench fitted to the end of this, and they're typically not that tightly held onto the rack. So if I just push on this, you can see that it's already started to turn. So now it's just a matter of winding this off of the rack, and then we'll expose the inner part of the rack and then the bush itself. And there you go. That's the end that goes on the rack. And you can see the small punched section there to lock it in place. So what I've done is I've just rotated the steering rack to push it all the way to the other side of the car. And I don't know if you can see this, but this is the bushing here. And I've got my pick hooked onto it. And there we go. There's the bush. So I'm just going to go ahead and replace that with a new one. So here's the new bush, and just need to press it in and refit the circlip that holds it in place. So one thing I forgot to show was getting the circlip out, but just remember to refit the circlip when you're done. With the circlip fitted, I now know that this bushing is not going to push out of the end of the rack when you push the rack outwards. And to test that, I simply need to turn the steering wheel the other way and push the rack back outwards away from the bushing. So as we can see, the rack is now fully extended and the bushing is still retained inside its housing. So with that having been done, I can now refit the end of the rack and put the boot back on. And with the rack end refitted and already tightened up, I just need to find some zip ties for this boot and get this refitted. Now, once I reattach the steering arm end, I will need to check the toe alignment because sometimes the bushings can actually alter the alignment a little bit, so I always need to recheck my toe once I've done this task. But that's a pretty easy, straightforward job once it's all done. Got the arm on, got the tie rod end on, and basically just need to refit the wheel and go for a test drive. So now let's take a look at this older style rack. So first off, I mentioned earlier there is a small screw here. Again, small screw. This is a posi drive screw, so use the correct tool to get this one out. And then it's a matter of getting these clamps for the boots off. Again, factory used posi drive screws, so use a posi drive screwdriver on this as well. So just withdraw the boot as best you can. I've got new boots for this rack, but there we go. So with the rack extended, you can actually see that punch I was discussing earlier. That punch right there is just what keys this ball joint end onto the end of the rack. So once again, I'll just use the pair of pliers to wrench this off the end of the rack. It's a little hard to do when it's out of the car because you got to put it on the vise, but that's how you pretty much get these off. You can come in here with a punch and just knock up the tab, but you still need to loosen this off, and it's just easier to use the pipe wrench. And just like last time, this end just unscrews. So now we can gain access to the bush. Now, the bush is held on by that small screw, so it is that deep into this housing. And here's the replacement. So the bushing lives way back here. So here we can see the end of the rack. I've pushed the inner part of the rack all the way to the other end, so we can now expose the bearing. The bearing is this silver ring, and the plastic part is just behind it. So you've got to push this silver bearing retainer all the way out of the rack in order to get to the plastic bush. And by the way, make sure you take the plastic piece off of here so that you can not break it, because it does protrude into this surface a little bit. One thing I would like to point out is that sometimes the rack actually goes behind the bushing and then falls down, and you can actually use the rack to push the bushing out. So the rack acts like a press tool and pushes the bushing straight out for you. I'll try to demonstrate that. So in order to push the rack this way, you need to turn the spindle here where the steering column attaches to. I'm going to just use a pair of pliers, but you can use a pair of vice grips or something to turn this. Just try not to damage the teeth, but I think this one will actually slide the bushing out, so let me give it a shot. Nope, it did not. Oh well, it was worth a shot. So here's the next tool I go to if I can't get the rack to push the bushing out. This is a blind bearing puller, and this is the bush. So the puller goes inside, and then you can expand the collar. See that three-piece there, that pie shape? It expands outwards, and it'll grab the bush, and then you can wind out the whole assembly by running this screw outwards. It's a pretty slick little tool. So the tool's all hooked up, and all you need to do now is tighten this nut to pull the expanded collar all the way out and withdraw the bush with it. And I always like to stabilize this end because this is kind of a flimsy little setup here. There's not much surface for these jaws to grab onto, so I just like to stabilize it with my hand. But there's not a lot of pressure. This bearing is just kind of sitting in here. There it goes. And there we go. There's the bush and the retainer sleeve that it sits in. And you can see now how that collar expanded and was able to grab onto the bush. So here's that bush. As you can see, it's trapped within this little metal collar. There's also this little metal spacer. I don't know what you'd call this piece, but it protects the bearing from the surface of the rack. Anyway, now it's just a matter of knocking this one out and fitting in the new one. I've got the old bush out, as you can see here. Pretty grubby, but it actually looks pretty good shape. I've seen far worse. Anyway, all you need to do is just press in the new one, and these are just a fairly loose fit, so you can just almost use your fingers to do it. And when you go to refit this, make sure you fit the little protective ring here. That goes in first, and then this slides in all the way until that hole there lines up with that hole there. So that's as far as it has to go in. And you can just use a socket and just a light mallet to knock that in. It's not a very tight fit. So, but do try to get these to line up. If you can't get this to line up and you end up with it, say, in this position, you can come in here and just drill a small hole. Really, this is just a relief for the screw. So this is the tiny screw. And the casting is threaded, but this hole, it's not really intended to be threaded. It's just a way for the screw to keep the bearing from rotating. So there's a tip for you guys. So that's pretty much it for getting to this bush, getting access to this bush, getting it out of the housing, and then doing the replacement. I'm going to go ahead and stop the episode here because I actually am planning on fully refurbishing this rack. So I'm going to strip it down, clean all the grease out, check the clearances on the gear versus the rack, fresh gaskets, fresh grease, fresh boots, and then reassemble it for future use. But I just want to show the difference between the bushes on an early rack versus the bushes on a later rack. And clearly the later rack has been designed for much more expediency in terms of its repairs. And again, you can do it in the field, whereas this you have to do on the bench. So hopefully you guys appreciated this episode. You don't often get to see how the rack works in terms of the way the bushes fit and things like that. So I figured I might as well make a little episode so you guys can see how that works. And as always, thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.